Alrighty. I was about to say good morning, but in fact, good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue on behalf of Fourth Space and the 17 Rooms exercise organizers. So as we get settled into this virtual space here today, we would like to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We recognize and are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their care for these lands and waters and their teachings about the earth and our relations. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal has, of course, been a gathering place for many First Nations for millennia, and today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. And we'd like to underline that recognizing and respecting the presence and ongoing connections of these historical and contemporary communities is an important step towards building trust and creating or renewing relationships. So today you are all here to consider SDG 13 climate action. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time to participate and to actively get involved in this process with us. We are running this 17-room exercise since the start of the winter semester via Fourth Space as part of our mission to create engagement around the projects and initiatives, commitments that are in development across the university. So it's our pleasure to welcome you in. There could be some audience members here with us as well, but really it's the participants that we're thanking for your time and participation, as well as the folks who are making this happen on a weekly basis, notably Jason and Monica, who are today's facilitators. You'll hear from them throughout for over the next 2 hours, as well as knowledge brokers, Prem Suryakumar and David Ward, who have been developing this process from the start as part of the team here. So Jason and Monica will be taking you through a number of exercises. Some of you have joined us a few times before, so welcome back. Some of you might be new. Please don't be shy about jumping in at any point, just with a raised hand, and we'll go ahead and call upon you. The chat is, of course, also a great resource here in this space. We welcome your comments in that space. If you rather pop your ideas in there, and we are collecting what's being written in the chat as well. That's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to ED Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Provost, Jason Enns. Over to you, Jason. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. Great to see you. I know most of you, some of you haven't met yet, so I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to who I am and my interest and motivation around the Sustainable Development Goals. Monica's going to do the same, and then she's going to walk us through the agenda for the day, and we'll get started. So my role is I lead and assist others with various strategic initiatives coming out of the Provost's office. The SDGs are one of those initiatives. My interest in the SDGs is connected to my own dissertation work back in the day, which focused on the work of universities to enact their commitment to civic engagement. And one of the things that I discovered as part of that work and really found striking was that there was often kind of an absence of a shared framework and a shared set of objectives that universities could work on with governments and with communities. And I think the SDGs have a lot of potential in that respect. And so I find them interesting in that way. And also, like most of you, I'm sure, just have a deeply felt sense of urgency around living outside of planetary boundaries. And I think the SDGs offer a great compulsion for us to work with urgency to address some of the major issues facing our planet. Climate action being number one. So that's a brief introduction to me and my felt connections with the SDGs, and I'll hand over to Monica to do the same.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us this lovely afternoon. I'm Monica Mulrennan, Associate Vice President of Research, responsible for research development and outreach, also professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. My interest in, and I guess perspective on the SDGs is informed by partnered research with Indigenous communities in coastal and marine settings over the last 30 years. I work closely with and for James Bay Cree communities of Iwishi in northern Quebec, and also Torres Strait Islander communities in the northern section of the Australian Great Barrier Reef on a range of community-led priorities for stewardship, protection and sovereignty of their traditional land and sea territories. my interest in the SDG framework as a researcher, also as a mom, I guess, is motivated by a deep concern for the declining health of the planet, as well as a sense of urgency to contribute to efforts to redefine our relationship to it and to one another. So the SDGs, as a list of good intentions, I think offer a useful starting point for a dialogue about how we might fashion an improved world of social and environmental justice and responsibility. And as Anna reminded us in the territorial acknowledgement, these conversations offer also an opportunity for us to advance our commitment to reconciliation and fulfill our responsibilities as settlers and as treaty partners. So Jason, back to you for the quick tour de table.
Great. So I'd like to give folks who are participating here today a chance to introduce themselves as well. And so if you can just give us your name, your role at Concordia, and maybe just a brief line or two about what's your interest and investment in the SDGs or climate action work more broadly, just so we can kind of get a flavor of what your motivations are and your interests are. So I'll go according to who I see first on my screen, and Barbara Henchy, you start us off.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Barbara Henchy. I'm at the John Molson School of Business. I work in the Dean's Office, and my title is Director, Office of the Dean in Strategic Development. I'm very interested in the SDGs. Sorry, I've been talking a lot today. Specifically how I came about this, it is now a form part of social impact, what we do at AAC, because we're AACSB accredited at the John Molson School of Business. So it's important for us to be mindful of, as a business school, what our impact is and how we can further along the SDGs. But at the same time, a couple of years ago, I took a carbon literacy course and I loved it, and I didn't understand why no one else had this. And that it wasn't something that, you know, cities universally kind of adopted so that their citizens would know a little bit more about their carbon footprint. So I think, yeah, that's my interest. And as well, in line with Monica as a mother, and really kind of looking towards a future where we want something to kind of mitigate what we see happening. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barbara. Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Sarah Baptist Brown. I'm the manager of the Institute for Cooperative Education. My interest in the SDGs overall stems from my master's research, which was focused on the social implications of climate change displacement, in particular in the Pacific, so in the small island developing states in the Pacific. And so, you know, it's an existential threat, and, you know, not 20, 30 years from now, but very much present for a lot of folks around the world. So that's my personal interest. The hat that I'll maybe also wear today is how we engage with students. So students at the Institute do internships. And we have an opportunity for students to engage in sustainability in their internships. So not just, you know, working in a very obvious context where they might touch environmental issues, but actually in any context. So we're able to help students find opportunities and identify really where they can kind of keep an eye on sustainability, even if they're in, you know, finance or engineering or whatever it might be.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Sebastian. Kakard.
Yes, thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a colleague of Monica. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment, and that as Damon as well. And I'm here mostly to push the agenda of Flying Less. This is an initiative that we have put together in the Department of Geography. And I think as academics, since we're keep on saying that there are some issues and we need to change our behaviors, I thought that we should start with ourselves and try to reduce our flying activities. So I'm here to push the agenda and to make sure this is heard at the university level, because I would love to have that agenda being taken into account at the university level. That's it.
That's great, and that's a very concrete thing we can start with when we get to the part of the discussion today about what we might do. Amara.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm Amara. I wear multiple hats at the John Molson School of Business. The most relevant for me being here is being in charge of the sustainability ecosystem, which is part of the JMAC, the John Molson Executive Center. We engage in multiple activities, including organizing events, also offering the SIPC, the Sustainable Investment Professional Certification. As part of my role, also, I am responsible for the Sustainable Investing Practicum, where students get to manage a fund with a sustainability mandate. And I teach a sustainable investing course as well. And for me, climate is a dominant component of sustainability and is the one that takes up all of the air, most of the air, not all, being the only factor really that is existential to our presence on this planet as a species. That's not an exaggeration to say that it is. And also transformational in how it's driving us to change an economy that's been driven by fossil fuels for 200 years into one that is driven by low carbon. And we have to do this in a much shorter frame of time.
Yeah. Thanks, Amara. Damon.
Hi, everyone. Damon Matthews, also a professor in the Department of Geography, Planning, Environment. I've been in the climate science research world for a couple of decades now. So my interest in climate action comes from the experience as a climate science researcher over the years. And yeah, I mean, observing what is going on and how slowly overall we are picking up on it and implementing response strategies. And so, yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks, Damon. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Pache. I'm a PhD student, second year, and I study in the Geography, Planning, and Environment department. I study past environmental change using tree rings, specifically climate, but also forest dynamics and forest history. And I'm also part of the Climate Emergency Committee in the department, which was formed, I guess, almost 4 years ago now. And we have a bunch of different initiatives to promote climate action, to raise awareness around the climate crisis. And it's just a group of students and faculty that want to get involved. And yeah, and otherwise through that, I presented with a couple of other students in dozens of classrooms in high schools, CEGEPs, and universities in Quebec, Montreal area, about the climate crisis. We made like a fun interactive resource. This kind of is just a fancy PowerPoint really, but it's like set up as a game show, and we gave it as a resource to educators. And I also work, I've done an internship through the LEADS program. I'm part of the LEADS program, which is a leader in digital sustainability. And I'm doing an internship with Reimagine AI, training a climate change chatbot. So to have this chatbot that anybody can interact with and have conversations about the climate crisis.
Cool. So much interesting stuff. Thanks, Alex. Kariya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kariya. I'm a FLQC postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology. I work with Professor Craig Hetherington. My research focuses on biodiversity conservation in Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa writ large. And my interest in SDGs stems from, I think, before I even started college, when I worked back in Kenya and I was thinking more about development. I did my undergraduate and then my master's focused much more on sustainability science and international development. And then my PhD has focused on African indigenous ways of engaging with the environment and as well as trying to rehabilitate African indigenous ways of knowing to contribute to the climate debate.
Super interesting. Great to have you here again, Kiriki. Julie.
Yeah, hi everyone. Julie Hamill. I'm the director in social impact stream at District 3, which is the Innovation Center for Concordia. Where it turns out that all our startups in the social stream touches every single SDGs, the 17 units, and we have quite a few that are dealing in this issue of climate, which because of the urgency, and we use a lot of systems mapping methods to get the startups to be thinking about the SDGs, and that's why I'm very interested. As a mother of 2 young adults, we want to save the planet.
It's great to have you here, Julie. Sam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Rowan. I'm an assistant professor in political science. I joined Concordia in 2020. I work on, my research is on climate politics, on specifically the international component of climate politics, so how the Paris Agreement works, how countries set targets, how they evolve over time. And I teach 3 courses to undergraduates and graduate students on climate politics and global environmental politics more broadly.
Amazing, great. Thanks for joining today, Sam. Michelle.
Yeah, I was not expecting me based upon my layout. So Michel Malian from the John Molson School of Business. I'm a professor there. My interest, I guess, is threefold. Personally, of course, as the parent of 2 adults. Second, research-wise, I've been conducting research on sustainability disclosure and sustainability performance now for over 30 years. Mostly, I guess, from the corporate side. And thirdly, I'm involved, I'm on the pension board at Concordia. I'm also on the board of Mouvement des Jardins. And at the Concordia, we are repositioning ourselves in terms of responsible investment. So that's been a topic of discussion now for several months. We're supposed to get a new policy in place, I'm told, at our next meeting. But it's taken a while because the ins and outs are somewhat more complicated than we expected. And at Desjardins, I'm on the responsible finance committee of the board. So essentially, I oversee their disclosure strategy and all the means that they are taking within the organization to reduce, I guess, their carbon footprint, but also other elements of sustainability, but reducing the carbon footprint is the major priority. So that's for me.
Great, thank you. Jen.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, my name is Jen Gabi, and I'm an affiliate assistant professor in the geography department. I finished a postdoc also in that department just last year, supervised by Damon. And my work is on climate action, climate movements, specifically around Indigenous-led climate work. And I collaborate with Indigenous Climate Action, doing some work on decolonizing climate policy. I'm also the director of research for the Front Lines, which supports research led by folks on the front lines of the climate crisis. And so I also teach courses at Bishop's and at McGill as a course lecture on climate and climate justice. That's me.
Nice. That's great. Thanks, Jen. Katja?
Hi, I'm a professor in the sociology and anthropology department. I've been working on SDG related issues for a couple of decades, long before the term actually emerged. In this particular context, I'm very interested in the intersection of climate change, biodiversity conservation, and social dynamics, things like social justice as well. But the conceptualization of climate change itself, from very holistic perspectives to more narrow perspectives that fail to look at these kinds of intersections. And I'm teaching a course, 400-level course on these matters this fall.
Great, thanks, Katja. Last but not least, Sebastian Dupois.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. I'm with the Sustainability Action Fund. So we are a fee-levy organization at Concordia that is mainly a grant funding body for student-led projects in sustainability. So I'm very interested in being a part of this discussion, just to kind of see where the projects that we support have already met kind of some of the targets that have been laid out, and how we can kind of garner more support for student and as well as kind of staff and faculty mixed stakeholder-led projects, because we're seeing that a lot of successful projects really have that kind of institutional support, faculty support. So I'm really interested just to see kind of where the conversation flows today, and where our student-led projects can fit in here.
That's great. Amazing group of people here. We've taken all this time to let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work and your interests, just because part of the goal of this exercise is to make these connections across different groups and bodies and interest areas, and really kind of foster the sense of collective project around this work. Monica's going to take us quickly through what the agenda for the day is. We're going to speed through some other parts of our exercises that will just kind of like lay the groundwork for the main part of what we're trying to do today here, is really identify what might we articulate as our targets as an institution around climate action, and what are the things that we can do to help us get there. So over to Monica for a quick walkthrough of the agenda, and then we'll dive in.
Yes, so what we've lined up, as Jason's just said, I mean, we're really asking that central question of how the SDG framework might help increase the impact of Concordia-related activities, activities related to climate action. So we've got really 3 exercises that are in preparation for the main event, which is really the brainstorm. So we're going to very quickly move into a critique and overview of the benefits and critiques of SDGs, just to get those out on the table. Then going to take a quick look at what's happening at Concordia in relation to climate action work. We will take a look at the targets and see to what extent they are relevant for us, and then move after a short break into the idea generation, that brainstorm. So just want to also just flag here, that the questions that we're building on, the extent to which they address decolonization and indigenization, addressing anti-Black racism and advancing EDI. The transformative promise of the SDGs is to leave no one behind. So this idea of ensuring that that's not an empty slogan. Okay, back to you, Jason, for the first of the exercises.
Great, so we're going to take just a few minutes here to look at 2 sides of the coin with respect to the SDGs, and this is to kind of situate ourselves in relation to this framework, which comes out of the United Nations, as everybody knows. And we're going to just quickly look at these 4 high-level kind of articulations of the benefits of the SDGs, what they have the potential for, what they help with. It provides this kind of common agenda, which is something I alluded to in my introduction. They connect economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability, placing clear emphasis on targets and outcomes. Each of the 17 SDGs has 6, 7, 10 targets, and each of those has indicators, so it's very concrete, and they really build a sense of urgency by establishing 2030 as a crucial deadline. On the flip side, these are some high-level critiques of the SDGs. One of them is that, if you can flip the slide, one of those critiques is that, I'll talk very slowly while the slide advances. Thanks, Doug, if that was you. The SDGs are so vast, it can be hard to know where to start and how to engage and how to manage the interconnection between the SDGs. There's also this the issue that the SDGs don't adequately account for the rights interests and perspectives of Indigenous peoples, although there was some minimal consultation related to the validation and adoption of the SDGs. There was not the kind of integral input of Indigenous populations that there should have been. The SDGs are often critiqued for not going far enough to really address the root problems that result in the kinds of situations we find ourselves in. And there can be some internal contradiction, for example, between economic development and biodiversity conservation. So we're just going to take maybe 2 minutes here to let folks articulate anything that they would want to add to those lists on either side of the coin of benefits or critiques, or to situate your own self in relation to that SDG framework. I know some folks that have participated in previous sessions were very critical of that framework, but wanted to engage on the subject. And so we just want to kind of give a chance for people to articulate any additional benefits or critiques. Feel free to put things in the chat or raise a hand if you just want to jump in with a quick comment. But this is just kind of taking a moment before we dive into the specifics of SDG 13 and the targets associated with it to just kind of to gather ourselves before we dive in. So does anybody want to articulate their own sense of the benefits or critiques, or elaborate on anything that was in those 2 quick slides that went past? And again, feel free to use the chat as well. Oh yeah, Katya, sorry. I was looking at the chat.
It's a quick comment, but it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
The SDGs, they tend to be sort of cross-sectoral, etc. And yet they lack a framework that really reflects a holistic approach. So this is more of a critique than anything else, but they in their attempt to be comprehensive, doing so without a sense of holism and how to have the different parts speak to one another, I think is not a good place to start if you want to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that question of how to pursue something particular, but yet have this sense of the holistic and intersectional aspects of the issue that you're working on. It's central to figure out in terms of a productive approach to SDG related work. Anyone else? Julie, I see that you have something in the chat. I'm not sure I understand. Are you asking us if any ideas are welcome, or do you want to jump in here at all?
I'm not aware. I'm sorry. I apologize for the picture. I'm trying to figure out how come my camera is not working. So while talking, the point of being so vast as an issue, maybe we could start thinking of finding a gap where we can actually have an impact with all the different solutions that exist out there. Where is it that's not being addressed? And I'm sure we can find some place somewhere.
Yeah. And that's a true across the 17 SDGs, and it's true within a vast one like climate action. So it's a great point. Amara, yeah.
Well, I'll come in defense of the SDGs. I've heard the criticism that they're too high level, and also the opposite criticism that once you go down to the next level and the specific goals associated with each one, that they're then too prescriptive. So I think when something gets criticized for doing two opposite things, that usually means it's done a pretty good job. But I think mostly the SDGs are, to me, very useful because yes, obviously they're aspirational. We're not going to end, poverty and all these things, but they're useful because of the way that the corporate world has embraced them. Unlike the previous Millennium Development Goals, for example, which didn't really find much traction within the corporate world or investing, right? So we see, impact investment strategies right now being developed, mapping out to the SDGs explicitly. I've never seen that before with any kind of UN, framework or goals or anything, right? So in that sense, I would give them credit for having resonated with both the corporate world and the investment world, or at least in a certain portion of the investment world, more than anything else before.
Super interesting. That makes me think, Michelle, about the question that we faced in a previous conversation around ESG reporting and how much of that is substantive about real engagement and how much of it is just kind of high level optics and PR, and yeah, the SDG framework, you see it a lot now. I mean, they're some of the best examples of organizations that are really integrating that framework into their way of thinking about their businesses come from the corporate world. But on the other hand, there's that question of like how substantive is that engagement in that commitment. I don't know if you want to jump in, Michelle.
No, you said it well, and I actually I saw the chat, the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment. It's really gaining traction, and it's gaining traction in, I would say, substantively, and not just greenwashing. Several investors are asking pointed questions now before they invest in entities or corporations. So, and money is flowing that way as well. So I guess it's a signal that it has some meaning. But going back to the SDGs, I guess maybe we had this discussion last time around. Like it's a very wide span. The problem is that, and I guess all of these objectives are very noble, and but then I don't know about you, but I can only do so much at one point in time, and I can probably focus on 2 or 3 things. And organizations actually are not that different, and I guess this is what we teach at John Molson. So. If you have too many goals, then you'll end up missing all of them. So maybe that's, I guess, for us, maybe the idea, should we pick the ones that are the most critical for Concordia, where we can have a significant contribution, and not forget the other ones, but maybe put them not on back burner, but maybe a next wave or next phase, because you cannot pursue 17 goals at the same time. And we don't have the resources as well. And not all of them are as critical or relevant or salient for us. That's a doubt.
Yeah, and this process of these 17 rooms and the kind of reports that's going to come out of them will hopefully we can arrive at some kind of like, okay, here's really what we're prioritizing. With respect to corporate uptake, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jim, but I'm just thinking about your own engagements at the community level and this question of like, how do corporate interests and community interests, can they find their way together? Is this framework helpful for that kind of integrated, different constituencies rowing in the same direction, even if they have different interests? And I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but that's one of the things that we, as a university, as an institution, have to try to navigate, is those, all the different communities we want to engage in advancing positive work toward these goals.
Yeah, I would just say that something I've been thinking about the SDGs for a while is there are these sort of pretty major tensions across them, as it was mentioned already, and I think thinking about who gets served by different goals or different targets and who doesn't, or sort of, I think is a really important way to think through some of those tensions. And I think we can do some of that today and going forward. Yeah, just like being really explicit about those tensions and not shying away from them.
Yeah, great, thanks. Any last comments here before we move on to talking about what's already on the Concordia landscape? If not, I'll hand back over to Monica. Okay, great.
So thanks, Jason. So really, as a next step, what we want to do here is, we want to really outline what's already happening at Concordia around climate action. Here we've begun to map that out to some extent, but we'd like really to give you just a brief opportunity to identify things that we might be missing from the current landscape. You see what we have here, just it's organized in terms of the research and then the academic programs, the learning opportunities in the center, and then really looking at campus operations in the other columns. So some of what, like much of what was part of the introductions, some of these initiatives mentioned there. So many of you closely associated with these initiatives. But just quickly, if you see something that's missing, something that we haven't captured here, great to hear that. We've really gone for things that have high discoverability, visibility. So we're not getting individual courses, we're not getting individual research programs necessarily. But if you did see anything we were missing, that would be good to know. Also, just to really want to flag the fact that we have so much happening. Maybe the next slide. Thanks, Doug. Great. So much happening through the Sustainability Action Plan that's related to SDG 13. So just to put those on your radar as well. Oh, thanks, Alex. Yeah, the omission there of the great work that's happening through the Climate Emergency Committee. And then I also, so I'm not going to spend much time on this. Actually, Michelle, yeah, I see your hand up there.
Yes, going back to the previous slide.
Previous one, something we're missing there?
No,
yeah.
Well, actually, it's very nice, but some of these initiatives are supposed to reduce the university's emissions or carbon footprint. So they're kind of internally focused. Some of them are research oriented, so most likely are going to help other organizations achieve some reductions in carbon gas emissions or other sustainability goals. Some of them might be more teaching oriented, so training people who are going to be able to contribute. So would it be possible to differentiate? Because now it's a bit overwhelming, but I don't know actually to which goals I'm actually contributing and getting a sense of where my actions are being put as an organization. Because we have a role to play on all these dimensions, but it's a different role.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it is quite a complex landscape. It's inward facing as well as outward facing. And I think that would be an interesting exercise in terms of the mapping to really identify those different dimensions of that. I mean, that is something we could discuss perhaps as something that would be worth doing as the next part of this exercise. I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, I'll just note that we've talked about it but haven't done it yet, Michelle, in terms of mapping, say, the relationship between our research centers and their work in relation to the SDG framework. And same question with respect to teaching. We've done a kind of a scan of course descriptions for sustainability related content. We haven't done that with SDGs, and we haven't taken a further step that some institutions have that actually asks faculty to do that kind of reflection on the integration of the SDGs in their own courses and down to the assignment level. It's a big undertaking, but these are the kind of things that if we pursue this further as an institution that we would definitely need to do to get that finer grained sense of really where our greatest opportunities are for impact and contribution.
Actually, in that sense, where it would be useful is that if we pursue a strategy, we'll need the performance indicators. Yeah. But the performance indicators are going to be different according to the goal we set for ourselves. Research, teaching, in-house action. So that's why it's going to be important, because if we want to have the right indicator and to be able to monitor it, then we have to get the setting right and to differentiate.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, so important. It's so much more attention to research impact these days. So developing the methodologies and the indicators for that, as well as the other contributions around teaching and learning, hugely important. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to mention something. So I mentioned before briefly at the Institute for Cooperative Education, we're trying to find ways for students to engage. So this is certainly an external facing. Although we work with all the faculties, we're not academic in the same way as most of you are in this conversation. So one initiative that we have is the Sustainable Internship Program. And it's a funded program allowing students to work with nonprofit organizations and have their internship be still remunerated, because that's a key component for us at the Institute, that students must be paid for their work, which is another SDG, which we were also part of that conversation. So it's really allowing students to kind of think outside of what they normally kind of go towards in terms of their internships, so that they get that experience in community organizations, but again, thinking about sustainability. So that's another initiative.
And nice connections across them. Thanks, Sarah.
So, Sarah, quick question. Does it have to be a nonprofit?
For the funding, yes. We promote sustainable internships otherwise, but in terms of getting the funding, yeah, it's at nonprofits that typically otherwise are not able to remunerate students, which is why we see students less keen sometimes to go take on those kinds of internships.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So there's one more slide that I just quickly wanted to mention. So Doug, that one on the publications. And really this one, clearly in terms of research impact, publications are not always, they're certainly not the only one and not always the best, but just to flag, they're relative to its research activity on other SDGs. I think that this is a useful slide just to see where we are quite focused. It's the third one there, 203 publications showing up in that Scopus, the Scopus analysis. So just based on all of this then, I mean, really in terms of the overall landscape, thinking about areas of concentration and strength, and then posing really the central question here, which is in view of all of this work, how can we be more impactful around climate action? And what, if anything, does the SDG framework challenge us to do differently, or in relation to what we're already doing? Barbara.
Yeah, I guess my first thought seeing all of this is how much work is being done. And I think that's fantastic. I think awareness and communication is always something, because we're such a large institution, that's always something we kind of grapple with. And I think, there are times where we can have passive communication, but I think for the SDGs, we might need a little bit more active communication, just because I think just looking at this group of people, everyone kind of has a deep connection to it at some level. And it would be great to have people with a perspective that have also no idea participating, just because I think those are the people we would really need to be getting to. So as an institution, the impact of the scholarly work is amazing. And we can see that we do have experts in it, but how do we bridge that gap and really move towards something that's a bit more tangible? I don't know that it's necessarily a large, a clear ask, but that's my first thinking is if we, I know the 17 rooms is one step, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can generate a lot more interest in this. I know, that we have a lot of things going on at the student level as well in different areas. Enactus, I'm thinking of Enactus and the work that Enactus does. But it's both bringing all that together as well as expanding it and just getting everyone to be a bit more aware of their surroundings, and how do we educate people to the level where the base knowledge of what they're doing is helpful, that in and of itself, because they're having conversations within their environment.
Great. I mean, the whole communications piece and awareness is so critical here, and I think it'll be an important part of the brainstorming we do. Thanks for that, Barbara. Katya?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about communications, but that's a really crucial point. I find that the sort of quote unquote natural sciences, the kind of work that Damon does, they're very good at doing science communication. And sadly, I don't think that in the social sciences we do an equally good job at doing science communication of the science we do about science. So, but my point was going to be about something else, and it would be about maybe thinking of the changes that we could introduce to our institutional culture. One thing that I would really like to see is Concordia creating opportunities that really encourage and reward people for doing truly transdisciplinary work. There's a lot of cross-disciplinary work between, disciplines that are somewhat closely related, but I personally love working with biologists and, natural scientists and truly collaborating. But the institution, I think, could do even more than it already does. Maybe create some special, seed funding projects for work that's truly transdisciplinary, more than the usual working with your neighbor discipline. And also perhaps even in terms of, how we get evaluated, having the possibility of including that in our own performance reviews, like the extent to which we engage in this kind of truly collaborative transdisciplinary research. That might be something worth considering. And then finally, we just went through and are still in the midst of a pandemic that actually led us to engage in a lot of behaviors that are much more sustainable in some ways. And I'm always saddened when I hear people get all excited about, we're going to go back to normal. We can go back to, going to conferences and traveling, to faculty meetings every month or whatever. So, it would be a nice moment to pause. I know that social interaction in person is very important, but maybe we could pause and think about, we don't have to go back 100% to how we were doing things. Can we learn from that and find a more balanced way to carry it forward?
Thanks, Katya. Great points. I mean, we do have this Sustainable Transitions Team Research Initiative, which is very much part of our efforts to fulfill this commitment to the SDGs. We should ensure that is more transdisciplinary than interdisciplinary. So it would be interesting to get your thoughts on how to push that bit further. And there's a conversation that's happening over the next few months around inclusive excellence that I think is an opening there to address your second point. And I think, the changing the culture, if anyone else wants to weigh in on that one, that's a really important one. This moment that resisting the temptation to fall back into the old familiar patterns, really important to avail of that opportunity.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to say one thing as a social scientist, so this is self-critique. We tend to look at the natural sciences from a critical lens, and I think we do interesting contributions, but sometimes it's such a sort of an extent of critique that then it creates a barrier where I wouldn't be surprised when natural scientists don't really want to work with us, because that's the perception, is that all we do is critique the social construction of science. So, maybe having some forums where we could get some of this out in the open might be an interesting, I'd be happy to put my energy into that for sure.
Great. We'll be calling on you. Sebastian.
Yeah, I cannot miss that opportunity to do a bit of leveraging for flying less. Thank you, Katya, to bring that point. I mean, I think we really need to rethink the way we interact with each other. We have this opportunity. I think this crisis is an opportunity for us to think about, do we really need to do those kinds of activities? I mean, I'm not saying we should not fly anymore. Obviously not. We all know after 2 years that we still need to see each other, and that's really important. but we've been going to some extremes, and we really need to rethink the way we interact with traveling, and being a bit more reflective on that, instead of being very proud of going for one day in this destination and going one day in this destination. Like, is it really the way we want to think about our work? Like, can we say on one hand, there is an issue, we should consume less and we should release less CO2s, and on the other hand, well, I'm going to all these places and this is very exciting. So I think we need to really think about that, and I really would love to see it brought at the university level, in the sense of, is there any way to be accountable? I mean, and I don't want to be at the individual level, because we know that some people do research and they need to fly more, and that's all right. And people early in the career need to fly more, and that's all right. But still, I think we need the message coming from Herbert administration should be, it should be clear that going around is fine, but we need to be much more aware of the consequences and the message we send to the rest of the world, because very, very few people fly, and we're there pretending that it's all right and it's even great. I think we need to really think through that more carefully.
Sebastian, we now have a sustainability research stream. It seems to me that that would be exactly where that message needs to be communicated and practices developed around that. So definitely be in touch on that.
Okay.
Sam, thank you.
Yeah, and just wanted to pick up on something Sebastian said there, which is, and I guess you mentioned this, but there are real equity considerations with asking academics to fly less, right? I mean, junior academics need to build social networks, academic networks, and telling people that they can't go to conferences, major international conferences, has real implications for people's careers, I think. And I'm not saying that, you said that we shouldn't fly at all, like that's not what you're saying. But, at the margin, it matters for people very differently. And I just think that if the university is going to be kind of pushing or setting targets around what the carbon footprint of individuals' research looks like, there should be considerations for how that affects different people differently.
Great point, Sam. And I think there's the EDI lens is so significant these days that I think that could easily be brought into play with how that policy would be rolled out, or how the practices would be encouraged. But a really important consideration. Anyone else? I mean, I'm conscious of the time as well. I know, Jason, we wanted to move on to the next exercise, but lots there. Certainly lots happening in this space. Thank you for the omissions that you've identified. So Jason, I'll hand it back to you in terms of moving on to the targets.
Sounds good. Thanks, Monica. And I just want to welcome Ilian. I don't know if you're in a position to introduce yourself quickly, Ilian, but just wanted to give you a chance if you are.
Yes. Hello, everyone. It's just interesting. Everybody was talking about, trying not to fly. I've been trying not to fly, and this is my first flight in, anyway, a long time. And I'm heading to Davos. I think it's worth it. There's going to be lots of discussions around climate and nature-based solutions there. And so I'm excited to be here. I'm a research associate professor in the Department of Geography, and we're in the process of setting up sustainability in the digital age to hopefully make it a think tank within Concordia. And so I'm very excited about this conversation and how the work we're doing can contribute to this room. I'm also involved in another room with the Rockefeller Foundation in Brookings around room 9. So it's just exciting to see what's happening and how do we create the leadership needed and the community leadership around Concordia to have the impact we can. So just delighted to be here and listening in.
Well, really appreciate you joining from the airport, which is where I understand you are. And it's just really great to have you. So thanks for joining. Okay, so we're going to move, we're going to quickly do a little exercise here that engages us with the UN targets linked to SDG 13, climate action. So as we know, the SDGs are a negotiated agreement among UN member nations about how to define sustainable development. These targets are articulated actually for countries to monitor their own progress and contributions to sustainable development. We're in a position as a university where they're not written for us, but we're asking first as a first half of this exercise to just engage them at face value. And what we're going to ask folks to do here is to look at these 5, which I have to admit, just as an editorial aside here, they're not super compelling, in particular in relation to some other SDGs where the targets are much more interesting and multifaceted. I found this group, a relatively small group, not super compelling, but we're going to ask anyway, which of these do you think we as a university have the most to contribute to, or that is most relevant for us as the kind of institution we are? So again, which of these are most relevant to us as an institution, or that we have the most to contribute to? And we're actually going to ask you to weigh in via a poll here. And I'm going to make it really hard. I'm going to ask you to pick one of these 5 that you think we as a university have the most to contribute to, or it's the most relevant to us. If you don't feel like you have a view of the whole of the institution to make that call, just think about from your own perspective, which is the most relevant to you and your work that you think we have the most to contribute to as an institution. We're going to take a quick look at the results of that poll, and then we're going to flip the coin and say, if we were articulating our own targets, building on things that have already been done under our sustainability action plan, et cetera, if we were going to articulate our own targets, what might they be? First of all, I'm going to ask you to respond to this poll and identify the one that you think is most relevant or that we have the most to contribute to. And then Damon, do you have a question about the poll, or is it something else?
No, it was a sort of a response to your comment about these targets being not all that impressive. I think one of the weird things about the climate action goal to me is that there's not actually really anything here about decreasing emissions.
I know.
And the reason for that, as far as I understand, is that there's an entirely separate process under the UN FCCC that's dedicated to decreasing emissions. And so, one of the targets here is like implementing the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But even that is focusing very much on the finance part of the story. And so these targets have been constructed in a way to not overlap with the kind of emissions reduction process in the Paris Agreement that's being implemented, in parallel. But I do feel like there should be more pointers to that, because, obviously if you leave that out of the climate action portfolio, it's a pretty big omission. So I just wanted to flag that, to me, that like this SDG 13 does not, captures one piece of the climate challenge, but not, the biggest piece really.
Yeah, super helpful context, Damon. Appreciate that, and that really helps explain why there's that huge gap around the emissions reduction, which all of these around adaptation and integration into policy, et cetera, but doesn't seem to hit the heart of the matter. But nonetheless, let's take them at face value, and then we'll flip the coin and say, okay, so thinking broadly about climate action at the university, what can we most contribute to? So results here, very clear consensus around building knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. And that is explained as improving education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. Not to say reducing emissions. So pretty clear that this is really where the focus is at for folks here. I wholeheartedly agree. Would like to hear from folks who highlighted 13.1, 2, or none of the above. Just to hear quickly from you all about why you think it's important to have those other things in consideration as well, or felt like none of the above was the most appropriate response. Be curious to hear from you. Yeah, Sebastian. Oh, sorry, Eliane, were you going to jump in? Go ahead, Sebastian.
Very briefly, I think we all know what's going on. It's clear that we need to learn more. I'm surprised. I have a feeling that we're all aware, but it's just like we don't want to see it. So that would be the reason why I didn't answer that question.
Okay, thanks. Eliane, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just saying, I'm doing a lot of work with developing world nations, and strengthening resilience and adaptation goes hand in hand with strategies related to carbon sequestration. And so, so by actually addressing that one, we're also looking at how do we reduce 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from agriculture. And we have Africa's population set to double by 2050. So this in some maybe, so depending on where we are in the world, that one is actually a really major one on many, many levels. And so, and so right now I'm working on proposals related to that I would be bringing in terms of my work to Concordia. And so that's why that's the one I'm most able to contribute to.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Quickly, anybody else? Sebastian.
Yeah, I actually put none of the above because I didn't feel very compelled by any of the direction of what was stated there. And actually just I'm participating now just to kind of piggyback off of what Eliane was saying, is that I think that, Concordia having like a main priority with climate action is very difficult, because it's such a diverse place, just being an institution that has so many people working kind of in their own silos, that I feel like it's okay to recognize that, because that is kind of naturally created in an institution like a university. But with regards to agriculture, I have a bit of a background in working around the food system at Concordia, and one of the big frustrations has been a lack of commitment from those who make decisions regarding the food system and the exclusivity contracts to multinational corporations that don't really have much of a focus on regenerative agriculture, on local food systems. So I think these are things where I think, the university, yes, on the whole, can identify this as a major commitment, but there are pieces, kind of more secondary, tertiary pieces of the university's strategic directions within their departments, like with the food system, where I think there's a lot of possibilities for Concordia to engage and to either, one of the things that I've always kind of dreamed of is seeing Concordia have an agricultural program and supporting kind of land-based teaching and working with a lot of the folks that have been supporting kind of land-based pedagogy. And then that, I think, is the type of thing that would really complement with the type of agriculture that we need to see on a large scale to actually actively fight climate change and reduce emissions and sequester more carbon into soil. So kind of went on a little tangent there, but that's kind of one of the things that I really see that isn't talked about very much at all when it comes to climate change at Concordia, and one of the spaces where I see a lot of potential for change, and a lot of people without access to decision-making tables or funds that are actively working towards those things, but just don't have the resources to have a large enough impact.
That's great, and it provides a great segue. I'm going to let Damon go first, though. But the segue we're going to make here after Damon's comment is, so we responded to the UN targets as they were, with the limitations that Damon has shared with us. If we were to flip the script and say, okay, what are our own climate action goals and targets as an institution? What would they be? So keep that in mind, because we're going to ask you to actually, in the chat here, articulate that next. What might we articulate as our goals as an institution around climate action? And maybe it's a flying less target. Maybe it's some, a broad range of other things, but I want to capture that from folks here after we hear from Damon.
I did choose the education capacity one. It seems like this is the primary mandate of the university, so it does sort of play to our strengths. To respond quickly to Sebastian's comment, which I do agree with, although I would say that I think for the most part have a pretty good understanding of the problem, of the nature of the problem, with the exception of the still unfortunately very powerful holdouts in the world who don't. But I think we actually have quite a poor understanding of the solutions, and so this kind of education in relation to the solution space and the implementation, and also building capacity around implementation of effective solutions is probably the most important piece of that to me.
Super helpful. Maybe try to fit that into the question that I'm posing, Damon. I'm going to ask folks, I'm going to give you 2-3 minutes here of some quiet to put into the chat an articulation of what you think an interesting target or goal for our institution would be with respect to climate action. And Damon, maybe this is around this kind of solution-oriented training development and guidance. Others of you have different things that you would want to see emphasized. I'm just really curious to capture this sense of if we were articulating for ourselves, how do we become more impactful and have a bigger difference? What can be our kind of plant the flag out there as our North Star? What do we want to achieve by 2030? What is something that can really galvanize our community in terms of climate action work? Just going to give you a couple minutes to think about that question and try to articulate. It doesn't have to be perfect language, or doesn't even have to include percentages or indicators, but just capture a sense of what you think we as a particular university, where we have the most potential to contribute with respect to leading and inspiring climate action. And this, of course, I'll just note that this is building on things that are already integrated into our sustainability action plan, which there was an overview of the targets established there in the participant guide, and maybe we could put those back up on screen so folks can see those, but those are very high level in general. So I'd be curious to see what folks would identify in addition to what's there already. So Alex, it's the education component and the literacy. So it's not, that's complementary to and maybe prior to solution-oriented work, as Damon suggested, but that literacy piece you think is really essential. Yeah.
Yeah, well, specifically, I don't know, I feel like a lot of students know generally about the climate crisis, but they're sort of listless with like the salute, like as Damon said, we're all a bit, there's a lot of uncertainty with solutions, but I feel like there should be a way that more students could be aware and sort of literate about the climate crisis.
Yeah, there's some seconds there in the chat. The climate related curriculum work. What do other folks have to say here? Katya, you agree? Thumbs up on that. Oh, interesting. Space efficiency. You think that's a really crucial intervention, Michel?
I do. Well, at least no more construction. We know the construction is fairly carbon intensive. Concrete factories are the largest emitters, at least in Quebec, we know. So the steel that goes in construction, and do we need all that space now with all the new ways of working we've devised? Can we, and then Jason and I have talked about it before, could we reposition our space? Personally, if you ask me, I think we have too much space for what's being used, and we could probably reposition it for other social causes.
Super interesting. A lot of emphasis on the education opportunities and goals. That's great. Oh, sorry, Sarah, I didn't see your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, so Jen commented, I was going to bring back something that Jen mentioned earlier in the chat. So the SHIFT Center for Social Transformation partners with, organizations, initiatives outside of the university. So I think there's also a role for Concordia to play in the overall Montreal community. Obviously, the obvious place to kind of have an impact is on our student body, but I think we matter in the Montreal landscape as well. So how are we, doing what Fourth Space does, extending our walls beyond, the ivory tower, quote unquote. And I think there's a role for us to play anyways. I think our culture at Concordia is to be very in the community, to be activist, more than other institutions, let's say, in and around the city. So I think that's another place for us to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, that's actually it jibes with Damon. I don't know if you remember, but you, Monica, and I had a conversation several months ago in particular about this conversation and how do we advance the thinking around climate action at Concordia when we just launched the Sustainability Action Plan. And I remember one of the things that you had identified there was that our current thinking about climate action in relation to Concordia was around operations and some around research and teaching, but there was this, how do we become a key actor and a catalyst and a mover in our community, in our larger communities, and address some environmental justice issues in our local communities? And I think that's a super interesting path to pursue in terms of our thinking about what we can do institutionally outside of just our own operations as a higher ed institution. Yeah, Katja.
Sorry. Yeah, on that sense, Cambridge University has a very interesting institute where they actually do commissioned research. And I've toyed around with the idea of an institute that would do that commissioned research, but then would use some of the money that is gathered that way for pro bono with local communities, different epistemic groups, and so on. So as a way of transferring wealth, so that I know it's a bigger idea, but it might be something that Concordia definitely would have the resources to engage with. And the other one is kind of a question. It is a rhetorical question. It's not for an answer at the present moment, but we seem to kind of have gone from everybody's teaching online because there's a pandemic to nobody's teaching online because now we're back in the classroom. And I'm kind of thinking, is there like somewhere of a better balance where a certain percentage of people might be very happy just learning online, and that's less people back and forth using, because it's not just traveling by airplane that is a problem, right? There's thousands of people moving around the city and so on. So I was just wondering if there's maybe some kind of balance point where there are enough students who want to be learning online, faculty who are interested in teaching online, and then there's also some stuff going on in person, as opposed to this all or nothing pendulum that we've been through.
Yeah, it's related to Michelle's point about space usage. It's also all the mobility and transportation issues associated with people actually convening in particular spaces.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Amara, and then we're gonna take a quick break so people can just stretch their legs, use the washroom, and then come back and really try to go a little bit further on the question of, so this is an amazing set of ideas and targets and objectives, and then the question is what can we actually do to get started toward these goals, or what are some really concrete things we could undertake? I'm sure there are pieces of that in the chat right now, but that's really what we're going to devote the last segment of our conversation to. And we're going to break out into smaller groups so there's more chance for everybody to jump in. So, Amara?
I don't know if this is crazy or too much, but we have required recently everyone here and all the university members to take these the online videos and quiz tests for sexual harassment and so on. What if we do that as a requirement for graduation for every student at Concordia, that they have to go through an online course on climate? And I know some people will just forward whatever, but if you have to take the quiz to pass, at least you know what the right answer is. And it can be done in a way that's fun and not onerous, and at least we make sure everybody that has a Concordia degree has a basic level of knowledge on climate.
I don't know if there's going too far in a conversation like this, but super interesting thing to consider. So we want to take a pause here just to let folks have a break since we've been going at this for an hour and 15 minutes. So let's just take 3 minutes this time because the conversation is so full that we're just running out of time. Take 3 minutes, come back at around 12:20. Sorry, I'm on the West Coast right now. I admit I have flown as well.
3:20.
Sorry, 3:20. And then we'll reconvene and really dive into kind of the particulars of what might we do as what we commit to and undertake as an institution to kind of reach some of these targets and goals. So see you in 3 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we'll get started since we finish at the top of the hour, whether it's here or in Vancouver. So we're going to move into the brainstorming, and really the question that we're posing is, what might we undertake to have greater impact in relation to SDG 13? So what we want to do here is identify what might be a next step, not a perfect step, as they say, within the 17 rooms philosophy. But what we want to do is really focus on actionable ideas, and we're already getting those. I mean, there's some fantastic ideas in the chat. the thinking is around actionable ideas, ideas that are big enough to matter, small enough to get done. And we're seeing, we have a selection certainly of some immediate actions that could be taken. There's also this idea of working within a slightly longer time frame, something like by 2030, the more aspirational than the more immediate ideas within a 12 to 18 month framework. So it's useful perhaps to think in terms of those two frameworks. We're really after some actions that connect to targets and outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. And before we head into the breakout rooms, you might want to just have a quick look in the chat, because the chat doesn't actually follow us into the breakout. But just some of the ideas that were captured there, just have a quick review of some of those. And in thinking about the actions, keep in mind that there are different levels. I mean, Michelle kind of flagged that earlier, that there are different levels in which some of these actions can take place. Some on campus, some in the neighborhood and city, some nationally, and some, of course, internationally, which Leanne and Sarah also flagged earlier the importance of that. So, and in heading into the breakout groups, we're going to head into 2 separate breakout groups, and we need to have someone to report back from each of those. So we can quickly identify who that will be within each of the groups as the first task, and then really focusing on what we might undertake to have greater impact. Jason, I don't know if you want to add any clarification on that, or if we should just head straight in. We don't have a whole lot of time, and we're taking 15 minutes. What are we?
Well, let's go with 20. Take us to 12:45 or 3:45.
Okay. Great. So I think David has us. Are we getting called into our rooms? Is that about to happen? Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Doug.
Great, welcome back, everyone. We just have a couple more minutes here before we end our session. Super fruitful conversation. I don't know how much of a report back we're going to be able to do, but maybe Monica, I'll see if you have somebody lined up to do a share back from your room quickly.
We do. We have Alex.
Okay.
Alex.
Great, Alex.
Yeah. Oh, this is gonna be hard. There's a lot there. So we talked about, as we suggested earlier, the sort of an education thing about the climate crisis within Concordia for faculty as well as students. We've also talked about, Karaoke said, cycling culture, that further promote cycling culture in the school, and continue to promote Indigenous perspectives in relation to climate solutions. And then there's also, we talked a lot about D3 and having sort of a challenge, sort of competition, more of a collaboration, but maybe some sort of course or some sort of competition to promote climate solutions and talk about climate solutions and have and work on those things together, and more visibility around solutions in general. And some intergenerational, like improving intergenerational communication. And also Sebastian talked about we need to focus a lot on, on actions, because we've done education so many ways. There's only so many ways we could reframe it. And then there's also the caveat that some international students and like middle-class students, international students may not have as much climate education from wherever they came from. And there's also an issue with for middle-class students of the sort of conflict between economics and climate change, and that they don't really want to hear about it because there's that conflict.
Super interesting. On our side of the wall, Barbara came to the mic and said what Damon said with the Climate Solutions Institute, and then dropped the mic, and then she was like, "We're done." But we had a little bit of discussion around what that kind of entity could look like, gaps it could fill in the Quebec and Montreal ecosystems. Raised one question about the advocacy role and advocacy profile of such an entity, and how much of a governmental and public and policy oriented advocacy position such an institute would take. And then our discussion moved on also to potential kind of partnerships for Concordia as an institution and other organizations that we would potentially try to work more closely with in order to really leverage our capacities and advance various parts of the climate agenda. I won't dive into listing those since we only have a couple minutes left, but super fruitful conversation. So I'll just give a quick minute to anybody else that wants to underscore or add in anything before we do our wrap up. In terms of ideas that you heard in your breakout rooms and that you really want to champion for Concordia in terms of being an institution that really leads and catalyzes urgent climate action. Just a small window here, and then I'll give some closing remarks and we'll wrap up for the day. So anybody else want to jump in quickly with a last comment or observation? If not, I just want to say a huge thanks to folks to giving us a couple of hours of your time on a Friday afternoon. Beautiful sun streaming in from windows like Barb's. Really appreciate your commitment, and really hope that we can forge some areas of action that really advance climate action work at Concordia, building on the already immense array of things that are happening at our institution and the action plans that we have in place, but really doing all we can and being, filling filling a role as an institution that really does take as folks earlier said, the really existential crisis of climate action seriously, and does everything in its power to catalyze and lead and support change coming from all directions and all different sectors of our society. So huge thanks to all of you. The follow-ups to these 17 rooms conversations are feeding into a process we're calling a voluntary review, which helps us kind of understand how we want to situate ourselves as an institution in relation to the SDGs. And there'll be some outputs that you'll see coming your way following the conclusion of the 17 rooms process, which ends in June. And we'll re-engage you on the questions of where we go from here and what we prioritize and where the biggest opportunities are for us as an institution, really to make a difference and live out our values. So huge thanks to everyone. Really appreciate all your input and investment of your time, and just hand over quickly to Anna for just one last comment, and then we'll break off for the day.
The pressure's on. One last comment. Well, I wanted to say thanks to you, Jason, and Monica, of course, as always, for leading us through the exercise. But if I'm allowed one more comment, is just to say, as you leave, there's going to be a survey asking you for a little bit of feedback. If we could borrow 2 more minutes of your time, we'd so appreciate it. We've got 4 more rooms to go, and always improving on the process. So thank you, folks, for taking an extra minute to do that. Okay, bye. Have a great weekend. See you all very soon. Ciao.
Thanks, everyone. Great weekend. Bye.
Oh, thanks.